Some people are not financially stuck because they know nothing. They are stuck because they know just enough to feel responsible, but not enough to change their behavior. And that is a dangerous place to live. Because ignorance has a certain honesty to it. When you truly do not know, at least the problem is clear. You need to learn. You need to ask. You need to understand. But when you already know the basics, when you have watched the videos, heard the advice, saved the quotes, understood the concepts, and still your money life looks the same, the problem becomes harder to admit, because now the issue is not lack of information. It is lack of conversion. The information never became behavior. The lesson never became a rule. The rule never became a system. And the system never became part of who you are when nobody is watching. That is where many people lose years. Not because they are lazy, not because they are stupid, not because they do not care, but because learning can create the feeling of progress before real progress exists. You watch something about saving, and for a few minutes you feel awake. You hear someone explain debt, and you feel wiser. You listen to a breakdown about investing, and you feel closer to freedom. You save a post, you take a screenshot. You tell yourself, this is exactly what I needed. And emotionally, it feels like movement. But then the week continues. The same spending pattern appears. The same automatic purchase happens. The same debt stays untouched. The same bank account remains avoided. The same salary arrives, passes through your hands, and disappears into a life that still has no clear structure. And after a while, you are not just broke, stressed, or financially disorganized. You are confused. Because part of you says, but I am learning. And that is the trap. Learning about money can become a sophisticated form of procrastination. It looks productive. It sounds responsible. It feels mature. But if nothing changes in the way you use money, it is not transformation. It is entertainment with financial vocabulary. And that sentence matters because a lot of people are not consuming financial education to change. They are consuming it to feel less guilty about not changing yet. They are using content as emotional relief, not as a tool. They want the feeling of being on the path without the discomfort of taking the next step. And that is why this subject needs to be treated more seriously than a simple message like, learn about money every day. That advice is not wrong. Daily learning can be powerful. A few minutes a day can sharpen your thinking. It can help you understand saving, debt, risk, investing, compound growth, budgeting, taxes, inflation, and long-term planning. But only if the learning has an exit point. Only if it leaves the screen and enters your life. Only if it changes a decision. Because money does not care how many financial videos you have watched. Money does not reward you for understanding a concept. Money does not grow because you agree with good advice. Money does not become organized because you feel inspired. Money records behavior. That is all. It records what you repeat. It records what you avoid. It records what you justify. It records what you automate. It records what you measure. It records what you refuse to look at. And over time, your financial life becomes a public result of private repetitions. Not public to everyone else, public to you. Because your numbers know the truth. Your bank account knows. Your debt knows. Your habits know. Your recurring payments know. Your impulse purchases know. Your empty promises know. You may forget the details. Your money does not. That is why one of the most uncomfortable questions you can ask yourself is not, what do I know about money? The better question is, what does my financial behavior prove that I know? Because those are not the same thing. You can know that saving matters, but if nothing is separated before spending, what does your behavior prove? You can know that debt can be dangerous, but if you keep using credit to protect your lifestyle, what does your behavior prove? You can know that investing early matters, but if you have spent years waiting to feel ready, what does your behavior prove? You can know that tracking expenses brings clarity, but if you avoid your numbers every month, what does your behavior prove? That question cuts through self-image. And self-image is where many people hide. They like thinking of themselves as financially aware. They like being the kind of person who listens to serious content. They like understanding words other people avoid. Assets, liabilities, cash flow, interest, inflation, diversification, risk, long-term, freedom, discipline. But words can become decoration. And decoration is not structure. You can decorate your mind with financial language and still live with no financial system. You can sound awake while your habits are asleep. You can explain money better than you manage it, and that is not an insult. It is a warning, because once you mistake awareness for change, you stop pushing for evidence. You start feeling like you are improving because your thoughts are improving. But your life does not change when your thoughts become prettier. Your life changes when your repeated actions become different. That is the line. Repeated actions, not one intense weekend, not one emotional decision after a crisis, not one spreadsheet you created and abandoned, not one budget you wrote during a moment of panic, not one investment you made because someone online sounded confident. Repeated actions, the quiet ones, the boring ones, the ones nobody sees, the ones that do not make you look impressive, the ones that slowly turn chaos into direction. And this is where many people resist the truth because the truth sounds too simple. Track your money, spend with intention. Separate first, avoid destructive debt, build an emergency cushion, invest with patience and understanding. Protect your downside, increase your income when possible. Repeat, that does not sound magical. It sounds basic, and because it sounds basic, people underestimate it. They think the solution must be more advanced. Another method, another secret, another framework, another app, another creator, another course, another strategy. But sometimes the next level is not more complexity. Sometimes the next level is finally obeying the simple thing you already know. That is brutal because it removes the comfort of waiting. If the answer is complex, you can delay. You can tell yourself you are still researching. You can say you need more clarity. You can keep preparing. But if the next step is simple, then the delay becomes harder to defend. If the next step is to look at your last 30 days of spending, why have you not done it? If the next step is to separate a small amount when money arrives, why have you not done it? If the next step is to cancel what you do not use, why have you not done it? If the next step is to stop buying with money you have not earned yet, why have you not done it? The answer is usually not technical. It is emotional. And that is the part most financial content treats too lightly. Money is not only math. Money is memory. Money is fear. Money is status. Money is comfort. Money is identity. Money is comparison. Money is proof. Money is escape. Money is control. Money is the way some people try to feel safe, and the way others try to feel seen. So when someone says, just make a budget, the advice may be correct, but incomplete. Because a budget is not just a document. It is a mirror. And many people do not avoid budgeting because numbers are complicated. They avoid budgeting because the mirror is honest. It shows things. It shows that the problem was not one big mistake, but many small leaks. It shows that a lifestyle may be built on anxiety. It shows that some purchases were not needs. They were emotional exits. It shows that I deserve it can become a very expensive sentence. It shows that income may not be the only issue. Direction may be missing too. And of course, we have to be honest. Some people really do have an income problem. Some people are not overspending on luxuries. They are trying to survive. Rent is high, food is expensive. Medical problems happen. Families depend on them. Wages do not always match reality. Emergencies do not ask permission. So no, this is not about pretending that every financial struggle is caused by bad choices. That would be shallow, and it would be false. But it would also be false to pretend choices do not matter at all. Both things can be true. The system can be hard, and your patterns can still matter. Your income can be limited, and your leaks can still hurt you. The economy can be unfair, and avoidance can still make your life worse. You can deserve better conditions, and still need better rules. That is the mature view. Not self-blame, not victimhood. Responsibility without fantasy. Context without excuses, because the goal is not to shame people. The goal is to return some control to the places where control still exists. And for many people, the first place is visibility. Seeing the numbers, seeing the pattern, seeing the timing, seeing the emotional trigger, seeing the difference between a real need and a repeated escape. Because without visibility, there is no control. You cannot manage fog. You cannot improve what you refuse to see. You cannot fix a leak you keep calling normal. And you cannot build freedom on top of financial denial. That is why the first step often feels uncomfortable. Not because it is complicated, because it is revealing. You open the account. You check the statements. You look at the subscriptions. You calculate what the debt really costs. You see how often small purchases repeat. You see how much money moves through your life without a mission. And for a moment, you may feel worse. That is normal. Clarity often feels worse before it feels better. Because clarity removes the story you were using to stay comfortable. But discomfort is not always a bad sign. Sometimes discomfort means reality finally entered the room. And reality is where change begins, not in motivation, not in fantasy, not in the version of yourself you imagine after watching a video. Reality, the numbers as they are. The habits as they are, the debt as it is, the income as it is, the risk as it is, the emotional pattern as it is, that is where financial maturity begins. When you stop negotiating with the truth, because the truth does not need your permission to produce consequences. Debt grows whether you look at it or not. Expenses accumulate whether you track them or not. Missed opportunities pass whether you admit them or not. A lack of emergency savings hurts whether you believe in emergencies or not. Bad habits compound too. Not just money. Habits compound. Avoidance compounds. Impulse compounds. Lifestyle inflation compounds. And if you're not careful, years pass. Not because of one dramatic mistake, but because hundreds of small, reasonable-sounding decisions quietly built a life with no margin. That is the scariest part. A financial mess does not always feel like a mess while it is forming. Sometimes it feels like normal life. A little extra here, a small payment there, a subscription you forgot, a purchase you justified, a month with no savings, a debt you will handle later, a raise that disappeared into a better lifestyle. A bonus that turned into spending before it became protection. Nothing looks catastrophic until you realize you have been working for years and you still have no breathing room. That is when the question becomes painful. Where did the money go? But the better question is, who was directing it? Because money always goes somewhere. The issue is whether it was directed by your values or by your impulses, by your plan or by your mood, by your future or by your fatigue, by your priorities or by someone else's design. And make no mistake, someone is designing your financial behavior. If you do not design it, the market will. Apps are designed. Stores are designed. Payment systems are designed. Credit offers are designed. Notifications are designed. Buy buttons are designed. Subscriptions are designed to be easy to start and annoying to cancel. Advertising is designed to reach your emotion before your judgment does. So if everything around you is built to reduce friction around spending, your financial life cannot depend on willpower alone. Willpower is not a strategy. It is a temporary resource. It gets tired. It gets distracted. It gets emotional. It negotiates. It says, just this once. It says, I have earned it. It says, I will fix it next month. It says, this is not a big deal. And sometimes it is not a big deal. But repeated enough, small exceptions become a system. A bad one. That is why the opposite of financial chaos is not motivation. It is design. You design what happens when money arrives. You design what happens before you buy. You design what happens when you feel tempted. You design what happens when you receive extra income. You design what happens when you fail. You design what happens when you do not feel like being disciplined. Because a real system is not built for your best mood. It is built for your average day. And even more important, for your weekdays, the days when you are tired, lonely, angry, anxious, bored, insecure, trying to impress someone, trying to prove something, trying to numb something. That is when your system matters, because the financially dangerous version of you is not the one listening to advice calmly. It is the version of you with money available and emotion in control. That version needs limits, not punishment. Limits, a pause, a rule, a waiting period. A separate account, an automatic transfer, a spending category, a debt plan, a reminder of what this purchase costs beyond the price. Because price is not the only cost. Every financial decision has visible and invisible costs. The visible cost is the amount you pay. The invisible cost is the option you give up, the margin you reduce, the stress you increase, the freedom you postpone, the future decision you make harder, the emergency you become less prepared for. The opportunity you may not be able to take. And once you start seeing that, the question changes. You stop asking only, can I afford this? You start asking, what part of my future flexibility am I giving away for this? That question does not kill enjoyment. It matures it, because the goal is not to stop enjoying life. The goal is to stop confusing enjoyment with escape. There is nothing wrong with pleasure. There is something wrong when pleasure becomes the only way you know how to regulate pain. There is nothing wrong with buying something you like. There is something wrong when every difficult feeling becomes a transaction. Stress, purchase. Boredom, purchase. Sadness, purchase. Comparison, purchase. Insecurity, purchase. Celebration, purchase. Anger, purchase. Then money stops being a tool and becomes medication. But expensive medication. Medication that often leaves the original wound untouched and adds a new problem on top of it. That is why financial education must go deeper than tips. Tips can help, but if the pattern is emotional, tips alone will not hold. You need to know what money is doing for you psychologically. Is it helping you feel safe? Helping you feel important? Helping you avoid shame? Helping you feel in control? Helping you feel like you belong? Helping you avoid a conversation? Helping you distract yourself from disappointment? These are not comfortable questions, but they are useful. Because once you understand what role money is playing, you can stop pretending the problem is only math. And when you stop pretending, you can build better rules. Not rules that make you miserable. Rules that protect you from the version of yourself that uses money to solve things money cannot solve. That is a different kind of discipline. Not cold, not rigid, not obsessive, protective. A mature person does not create rules because they hate themselves. They create rules because they know themselves. They know their weak spots. They know their triggers. They know their excuses. They know which emotions make them vulnerable. And instead of acting surprised every time the same pattern repeats, they prepare. That preparation is what many people are missing. They do not need another lecture. They need a personal financial operating system. A simple one, clear enough to follow, flexible enough to survive real life, strong enough to protect them from impulse, and honest enough to show them when they are drifting. Because if your system only works when life is perfect, it is not a system. It is decoration. Real systems survive ordinary chaos. A tired week, a stressful month, a tempting offer, a social invitation, a sudden expense, a day when you do not feel disciplined. And that is why the first serious question is not, how do I get rich? The first serious question is, how do I stop being financially defenseless? Because before freedom comes protection. Before growth comes margin. Before investing comes clarity. Before optimization comes control. Before ambition comes stability. That order matters. A lot of people want to jump straight into growth. They want the investment, the return, the big opportunity, the strategy, the shortcut, the thing that makes them feel ahead. But they have not built the base. They do not know their monthly expenses. They do not know their true debt cost. They do not have emergency margin. They do not know their risk tolerance. They do not know the difference between investing and gambling with better language. They do not know if they are making decisions from strategy or desperation. And desperation is a terrible financial advisor. It pushes people toward promises, fast money, guaranteed returns, hot trends, things they do not understand, things they cannot afford to lose, things that sound like rescue. But money that enters a chaotic system often becomes chaotic money. It does not stay. It does not build. It gets absorbed. So the goal is not just to make more. The goal is to become the kind of person whose system can handle more. Because if your habits cannot protect a small amount, they probably will not protect a larger one. If every extra peso or dollar disappears, more income may only feed the same machine. A bigger machine, but the same one. That is why the boring stage matters. The stage where you track. The stage where you separate. The stage where you stop lying to yourself. The stage where you create friction before impulse. The stage where you build a cushion before chasing performance. The stage where you learn enough about risk to stop believing in magical certainty. That stage may not be glamorous, but it is where adults are built. Not adults by age, adults by financial behavior. Because age does not automatically create maturity. Some people get older and only become more expensive versions of their younger mistakes. They earn more, spend more, owe more, fear more, avoid more, explain more. But do not change the pattern. And after a while, they are not lacking income. They are lacking structure. That is the uncomfortable truth. More income without structure can become a larger cage. A cage with better furniture. A cage with nicer photos. A cage that looks like success from outside. But still a cage. Because if you cannot stop, cannot choose, cannot breathe, cannot refuse, cannot handle a setback, and cannot miss one paycheck without panic, then appearance is not freedom. It is pressure wearing good clothes. And the world is full of that. People looking fine while being financially fragile. People spending to look stable while feeling unstable. People calling it lifestyle when it is actually dependence. People calling it self-care when it is sometimes self-sabotage with softer lighting. People calling it ambition when it is really fear of being seen as ordinary. This is why financial change has to touch identity, not just numbers. Because if your identity is built around appearance, your money will serve appearance. If your identity is built around impulse, your money will serve impulse. If your identity is built around escape, your money will serve escape. But if your identity slowly becomes rooted in clarity, patience, and self-respect, your money starts moving differently. Not perfectly, differently. And differently is enough to begin, because nobody becomes financially mature overnight. You do not wake up one morning with perfect discipline. You build it by proving things to yourself. Small things, repeated things, things that look unimpressive. But every time you keep a financial promise to yourself, something changes. You become slightly more credible to yourself. That matters, because a person who does not believe their own promises needs constant motivation. A person who has evidence needs less. Evidence is stronger than motivation. Evidence says, I've done this before. I can repeat it. I am not helpless. I am not only the person who avoids. I am capable of acting before the crisis. That kind of confidence cannot be faked. It has to be earned. And you earn it through action, not through agreement, not through understanding, not through saving content for later. Action. Small enough to start, concrete enough to measure, repeated enough to become identity. That is where real financial education begins to separate itself from financial entertainment. Financial entertainment gives you stimulation. Real financial education gives you a change in behavior, and the difference can be invisible at first. Two people can watch the same video. One finishes it and feels inspired. The other finishes it and changes one rule. At the end of the day, they may look the same. At the end of the week, they may still look the same. But give it months. Give it years. One person has built a library of content. The other has built a library of evidence. Evidence that they can track. Evidence that they can save. Evidence that they can wait. Evidence that they can say no. Evidence that they can invest patiently. Evidence that they can recover after mistakes. Evidence that they can act without needing a crisis to force them. And that evidence compounds, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet way. The same way most serious things compound. Quietly. Until one day, the person has more margin than before, less panic than before, more options than before, more clarity than before, more trust in themselves than before. And from the outside, people may call it luck. They may say, you are good with money. They may say, you have discipline. They may say, you must have always been like that. But they did not see the boring part. They did not see the moment where you wanted to buy something and waited. They did not see the moment where you checked numbers you were ashamed to look at. They did not see the month where progress was tiny. They did not see the debt payment that felt like punishment. They did not see the first investment that looked almost irrelevant. They did not see the emergency fund that felt like money doing nothing. They did not see the invisible decisions. And most financial progress is built there, in invisible decisions. This is difficult because we live in a culture that rewards visible consumption more than invisible stability. People see the trip. They do not see the debt. They see the car. They do not see the payment pressure. They see the restaurant. They do not see the lack of savings. They see the clothes. They do not see the anxiety. They see the lifestyle. They do not see the fragility behind it. And because visible consumption gets social reward, many people start confusing being seen with being secure. But they are not the same thing. A person can look abundant and be financially trapped. A person can look modest and be quietly building freedom. A person can look successful and have no margin. A person can look ordinary and be one opportunity away from a major breakthrough because they prepared. This is why your financial life cannot be measured by how it looks from outside. It has to be measured by what it can withstand. Can it withstand a bad month? Can it withstand an emergency? Can it withstand a delay in income? Can it withstand a temptation? Can it withstand pressure from others? Can it withstand your own mood? That last one may be the most important. Can your financial system withstand your own mood? Because many people do not need more information. They need protection from the version of themselves that appears under pressure. The version that says, I do not care anymore. The version that says, I deserve this. The version that says, I will fix it later. The version that says, it is only a small amount. The version that says, everyone else is doing it. The version that says, this will make me feel better. Sometimes that version is not evil. It is tired. It is hurt. It is seeking relief. But tired people should not be allowed to rewrite the financial plan every week. Hurt people should not be the only ones deciding what gets charged to the card. Anxious people should not be the only ones choosing whether to take on debt. A good system exists because you know that not every version of you can be trusted with full control in every moment. That is not self-hatred, that is self-knowledge. And self-knowledge is one of the most underrated financial skills. Because personal finance is personal before it is financial. The numbers matter. But the person handling the numbers matters too. If you avoid discomfort, your finances will show it. If you chase validation, your finances will show it. If you cannot tolerate waiting, your finances will show it. If you confuse credit with ability, your finances will show it. If you use spending to regulate emotions, your finances will show it. If you measure progress by appearance, your finances will show it. Your money may not reveal everything about you, but it reveals enough. That is why real financial progress requires honesty, not brutal honesty used as self-punishment. Useful honesty. The kind that says, this is where I am. This is what I earn. This is what I spend. This is what I owe. This is what I avoid. This is what I repeat. This is what my money is being used for emotionally. This is the next small thing I can change. That kind of honesty is not glamorous, but it is powerful, because once you name the pattern, you are no longer only inside it. You can observe it, and once you can observe it, you can start changing the environment around it. This is where many people misunderstand discipline. They think discipline means fighting themselves harder every day. But if every good financial decision requires a battle, the system is too weak. You should not have to defeat yourself every single time. You need to reduce the number of battles. That is what systems do. They remove repeated negotiation. They make the right action easier. They make the wrong action slower. They create distance between emotion and purchase. They create a default, and defaults are powerful. If saving depends on whatever is left at the end of the month, saving is weak. Because the world will find a use for that money. Your emotions will find a use for that money. Your fatigue will find a use for that money. Your lifestyle will find a use for that money. But if saving happens first, automatically, before the money becomes emotionally available, you have changed the game. You are no longer asking your weakest moment to protect your future. You protected it earlier. That is the power of design. The same applies to spending. If every purchase is decided in the moment, advertising has the advantage. Impulse has the advantage. Mood has the advantage. But if you already know your limits, if you already know your categories, if you already know what matters, the decision is not created from zero every time. You have a framework, and a framework reduces stress. It does not eliminate life. It reduces chaos. The same applies to debt. If you decide about debt only when you want something, desire will argue like a lawyer. It will build a case. It will minimize the cost. It will focus on monthly payments. It will say, you can handle it. It will say, this is worth it. It will say, you work hard. But if you have debt rules before desire enters the room, you are harder to manipulate. You can say, I do not borrow for this category. I do not accept this interest rate. I do not take on payments that reduce my emergency margin. I do not turn insecurity into debt. That last line matters. Do not turn insecurity into debt. A lot of people do. They finance a version of themselves they want others to believe. They buy status. They buy relief. They buy proof. They buy the feeling of being ahead. But if the proof has interest attached to it, it may not be proof. It may be pressure. And pressure accumulates. A small payment here, a subscription there, a credit purchase, a lifestyle upgrade, a recurring expense, a debt that seemed manageable. Another one? Then suddenly the person says, I work, but I cannot breathe. And the reason is not always one huge mistake. Often, it is many small commitments that quietly removed flexibility. This is why margin is more important than many people think. Margin is not boring. Margin is oxygen. Margin is the space between your life and panic. Margin is what allows you to make decisions without desperation. Margin is what keeps an emergency from becoming a catastrophe. Margin is what lets you say no to a bad offer. Margin is what lets you wait. And waiting is a financial superpower. People who cannot wait pay more. They pay with interest. They pay with bad deals. They pay with panic decisions. They pay with accepting whatever is available. They pay with selling too early, buying too late, choosing poorly, negotiating from weakness. The ability to wait is not just emotional. It is financial. And margin buys waiting. That is one reason why emergency savings matter. Not because the money is doing something exciting. Because it gives you time, it gives you room. It gives you a buffer between life and damage. People sometimes look at emergency savings and think that money is just sitting there. But money that prevents panic is not useless. It is doing psychological work. It is doing strategic work. It is protecting the rest of your decisions from desperation. That is not glamorous, but it is valuable. And this is where the culture of quick wealth becomes dangerous, because it teaches people to despise the foundations. It makes basic stability feel slow. It makes risk feel exciting. It makes patience feel like weakness. It makes people believe they are falling behind if they are not multiplying money immediately. So they skip steps. They chase returns before building resilience. They enter investments before understanding risk. They compare themselves to screenshots. They confuse someone else's highlight with a strategy. They treat volatility like a personality test. They gamble because gambling sounds more heroic than budgeting. But wealth that cannot survive reality is not wealth. It is exposure. And exposure can look impressive until conditions change. That is why investing should not be approached as rescue. Investing is not there to save you from every previous mistake. Investing is not a magical machine that compensates for disorganization. Investing is not a place to dump desperation and expect freedom to come out. Investing is a tool. Powerful, yes, but still a tool. And tools require context. A hammer helps if you are building. It damages if you swing it blindly. Money is similar. Risk can help you grow if you understand it. Risk can destroy confidence if you take it without structure. That is why the order matters. Clarity, control, margin, then growth. Not because everyone must follow the exact same path in the exact same way. Life is more complicated than that. But because growing money without knowing your financial base is like adding speed to a vehicle with loose wheels. It may move faster, but faster is not always safer. And this is one of the most important distinctions a person can learn. There is a difference between financial movement and financial progress. Movement is activity. Progress is direction. You can move money constantly and still not progress. You can earn, spend, pay, borrow, transfer, subscribe, cancel, buy, sell, and still remain in the same place. Busy money is not the same as directed money. Directed money has a purpose. Some money protects. Some money grows. Some money pays obligations. Some money supports enjoyment. Some money buys learning. Some money buys time. Some money buys future options. When money has no purpose, it obeys pressure. And pressure is everywhere. Your environment pressures you. Your friends may pressure you. Your family may pressure you. Your social feeds pressure you. Your fears pressure you. Your past pressures you. Your imagined future pressures you. And if there is no plan, pressure becomes the plan. That is why the first serious financial transformation often feels like slowing down. Not because you become passive, because you stop reacting. You stop saying yes so quickly. You stop buying so quickly. You stop believing every opportunity so quickly. You stop making money decisions from emotional weather. You create space, and in that space, better judgment appears. This is especially important for people who say they want financial freedom, because freedom requires more than wanting out. Freedom requires becoming difficult to manipulate, difficult to rush, difficult to impress, difficult to scare, difficult to sell fantasies to, difficult to push into debt, difficult to separate from your own priorities. A financially immature person is easy to move. Move them with fear. Move them with status. Move them with urgency. Move them with comparison. Move them with shame. Move them with a promise. Move them with a discount. Move them with a story. A financially maturing person still feels all of that, but they do not obey it so quickly. They pause. They ask. They check. They compare. They wait. They remember the plan. That pause is not small. That pause is the birthplace of control. And control in personal finance is often built in tiny pauses. The pause before borrowing. The pause before upgrading. The pause before investing in something you do not understand. The pause before buying because you feel low. The pause before saying yes to a plan that does not fit your budget. The pause before turning temporary emotion into permanent cost. You do not need to become emotionless. You need to stop giving every emotion purchasing power. That is a very different goal. It is humane, and it is practical. Because money decisions made under emotional pressure often create problems that last longer than the emotion itself. The feeling may last an hour. The payment may last months. The insecurity may last an evening. The debt may last years. The desire may fade by tomorrow. The opportunity cost may not. That is why waiting is not denial. Waiting is information. If you still want it tomorrow, maybe it matters. If you still want it after checking your plan, maybe it fits. If you still want it after seeing what it will delay, maybe it is worth it. But if it disappears when the emotion cools, It was never a decision. It was a mood asking for a receipt. And this is exactly where financial learning must become practical. A good lesson should not end with, "That was interesting." It should end with a behavioral question. What rule does this create? What number do I need to check? What decision should I stop delaying? What mistake does this help me avoid? What part of my system needs to change? What evidence will prove that I used this? Without that question, content becomes accumulation, and accumulation can become noise. A person can know too much and still act too little. In fact, too much information can sometimes become another hiding place. Because the more information you collect, the more you can tell yourself you are being responsible by continuing to research. And sometimes research is responsible. But sometimes research is fear wearing glasses. It looks intelligent. It sounds careful. It says, "I just want to understand more." But underneath, it may mean, "I am afraid to begin. I am afraid to be wrong. I am afraid to see my real situation. I am afraid to discover that the next step is simple and I have been avoiding it." That is why you need to distinguish preparation from postponement. Preparation creates readiness. Postponement creates delay with better explanations. Preparation has a deadline. Postponement always needs one more thing. Preparation leads to action. Postponement leads to another tab, another video, another note, another plan. So ask yourself, is your financial learning producing decisions? Or is it producing a more educated way to remain still? That question is uncomfortable because it cannot be answered with theory. It has to be answered with evidence. And evidence lives in your calendar. Your bank account, your debt balance, your savings rate, your spending history, your investment behavior, your emergency fund, your ability to say no, your willingness to review, your consistency after motivation fades. That is where the truth is, not in how strongly you agree with financial advice. Agreement is easy. Implementation is where identity is rebuilt. And this is why small actions are not small. They are identity votes. Every time you track money, you vote for clarity. Every time you separate money first, you vote for future margin. Every time you wait before buying, you vote for self-control. Every time you avoid debt that would only protect your image, you vote for self-respect. Every time you invest with patience instead of chasing hype, you vote for maturity. Every time you return after a mistake, you vote for resilience. That is how identity changes, not through one declaration, through repeated votes. At first, the vote feels weak, almost symbolic, but repeated enough, it becomes believable. You start to see yourself differently because you have evidence. And evidence is what your mind needs, not just hope. Hope is beautiful, but hope without evidence becomes fragile. It needs constant reinforcement. Evidence is stronger. Evidence says, "I am becoming someone who does this." And once your identity begins to shift, behavior becomes easier. Not effortless, easier, because you are no longer acting against the whole image you have of yourself. You are acting in alignment with the person you are proving yourself to be. That is why the first financial rule you keep may matter more than the amount itself. The amount may be small, but the identity shift is not. Separating a small amount consistently teaches something deeper than math. It teaches that not all money is available for impulse. It teaches that future you has a claim on present income. It teaches that your plans deserve protection before your moods get access. That is powerful, and it is also the beginning of real self-respect with money. Self-respect is not refusing every pleasure. Self-respect is refusing to sacrifice your stability for temporary approval or temporary relief. Self-respect is not living miserably. Self-respect is not letting every desire become a financial command. Self-respect is not pretending money does not matter. Self-respect is handling money like your future matters too, because it does. Future you is not an imaginary person. Future you will live inside the consequences of what present you keeps repeating. That sentence should stay with you. Future you will live inside the consequences of what present you keeps repeating. Not what present you says, not what present you intends, not what present you understands. What present you repeats. And this is why the future is not as distant as it feels. The future is being quietly built by ordinary decisions. Today's automatic purchase, today's ignored number, today's small transfer, today's avoided debt, today's investment, today's excuse, today's rule, today's exception. All of it is construction. The only question is what kind. Are you building margin or building pressure? Are you building options or building obligations? Are you building clarity or building fog? Are you building confidence or building another reason not to trust yourself? Most people do not think of daily financial decisions that way. They think of them as isolated. This one purchase, this one month, this one exception, this one delay, this one debt, this one skipped review. But life is not built from isolated moments. It is built from repeated permissions. And once a permission repeats, it becomes a pattern. Once a pattern repeats, it becomes a lifestyle. Once a lifestyle hardens, it becomes difficult to question. That is how people wake up years later inside a life they never intentionally chose. They did not choose it in one moment. They allowed it in many moments. And that is why the opposite must also be built in many moments. A better life is not chosen once. It is reinforced. Again, again, again. Especially when the choice is boring. Especially when there is no immediate reward. Especially when nobody sees it. Especially when old habits ask to return. And they will return. Do not romanticize change. Your old habits know the way back. Your old excuses will sound convincing. Your old spending patterns will feel familiar. Your old avoidance will feel comfortable. Your old identity will try to protect itself. That is normal. The goal is not to become someone who never slips. The goal is to become someone who returns faster. That is a critical distinction. Financial maturity is not perfection. It is recovery. How fast do you notice? How fast do you correct? How fast do you return to the rule? How fast do you stop one bad decision from becoming a bad season? Because many people do not fail because they make one mistake. They fail because they let one mistake become permission to abandon the whole system. They overspend once, then say the budget is ruined. They miss one savings transfer, then stop for months. They make one bad investment decision, then decide investing is not for them. They fall behind, then hide. But a system must include failure. Not because failure is the goal, because failure is likely. Real life is messy. So a serious financial system asks, what happens when I mess up? How do I restart? How do I review without shame? How do I correct without drama? How do I prevent this from becoming a pattern? That is how you stop using mistakes as identity. A mistake is data, not destiny. It tells you where the system was weak. Maybe the rule was unclear. Maybe the amount was unrealistic. Maybe the trigger was underestimated. Maybe the debt plan ignored real life. Maybe the budget had no room for enjoyment, so it collapsed. Maybe the investment decision came from urgency. Maybe the environment was stronger than the plan. Good. Now you know. Adjust. That is a healthier response than self-punishment. Self-punishment feels serious, but often changes nothing. It just adds shame. And shame can make people avoid the numbers again. Then the cycle repeats. That is why the tone you use with yourself matters. You do not need to lie to yourself, but you also do not need to destroy yourself. The best financial self-talk is firm and useful. Not soft enough to enable excuses, not cruel enough to produce hiding. Firm enough to say, this is not working. Useful enough to ask, what changes now? That is the tone you need, and it is also the tone financial content should have. Not fantasy, not humiliation. Not empty motivation, clear pressure, useful pressure. The kind that makes you uncomfortable enough to move, but not so ashamed that you freeze, because money already creates enough fear for many people. The point is not to add fear. The point is to turn fear into visibility, and visibility into action. That is why this conversation should not end in guilt. It should end in design. Design one rule. One review, one protection, one small action that proves the learning left your head. That is how you start. Not with a perfect plan, not with a dramatic reinvention, not with a promise that your entire life will change tomorrow. You start by making one part of your financial life impossible to ignore. One number, one rule, one habit, one decision that no longer depends on your mood. Because the first victory is not becoming rich. The first victory is becoming honest. Honest enough to look. Honest enough to admit. Honest enough to stop pretending that awareness is the same as progress. And once honesty enters, the relationship changes. You stop asking vague questions. You stop saying, I need to get better with money, as if that means anything by itself. You start asking sharper questions. Where is my money going? What am I pretending not to know? What decision keeps repeating? What emotion keeps turning into spending? What payment is quietly stealing my margin? What habit would help me breathe 6 months from now? What am I calling normal only because I have tolerated it for too long? Those questions are not comfortable, but they are useful. And useful is better than comfortable when your future is at stake. Because comfort can keep you in the same loop for years. A loop of earning, spending, worrying, promising, and repeating. A loop of watching advice while living unchanged. A loop of feeling temporarily inspired and then financially exposed again. A loop where every month looks different on the calendar, but the pattern underneath is the same. That is why real change has to interrupt the loop. Not with intensity, with structure. Intensity says, I am going to change everything. Structure says, this happens every time money arrives. Intensity says, I will never spend impulsively again. Structure says, I wait 24 hours before non-essential purchases. Intensity says, I need to get serious. Structure says, every Sunday, I review my numbers for 15 minutes. Intensity says, I should invest. Structure says, I learn one regulated option, understand the risks, and start only when it fits my financial base. Intensity makes declarations. Structure creates evidence, and evidence is what changes a person. Because once you have evidence, you no longer need to convince yourself the same way. You are not hoping, you are different. You are watching yourself behave differently. That is a completely different kind of confidence. Quiet, earned, harder to shake, and it begins with small proof. A week tracked, a purchase delayed, a debt understood, a payment reduced, a transfer made, a subscription canceled, a plan written, a number faced, small proof. But proof. The mistake is thinking that small proof does not matter because it does not change everything immediately. But change rarely begins by changing everything. It begins by breaking the old pattern in one place. One place where you used to avoid, and now you look. One place where you used to spend, and now you pause. One place where you used to say, later, and now you act. One place where you used to hope there would be money left, and now you protect it first. That interruption matters, because it tells your brain a new story. Not I am financially free now. That would be false. Not I have solved everything. No. The new story is simpler. I am no longer behaving exactly the same. That is enough for day 1, and then day 2 needs another vote. And day 3, and the next salary, and the next temptation, and the next mistake, and the next restart. This is where people underestimate repetition. They want the emotional high of transformation. But transformation is usually a repetition that finally became believable. You repeat a rule until it stops feeling foreign. You repeat a review until numbers stop feeling like enemies. You repeat saving until not all money feels available. You repeat waiting until impulse loses some authority. You repeat investing with patience until volatility stops feeling like a personal attack. You repeat returning after mistakes until failure no longer destroys the whole system. That is not glamorous, but it is strong, and strong matters more than glamorous. Because glamorous financial decisions are often designed for display. Strong financial decisions are designed for survival and growth. And if you want a life with more freedom, you need strong decisions. Not just impressive ones. A strong decision may be invisible. Not upgrading, not borrowing, not buying, not reacting, not chasing, not pretending. Not turning every raise into a higher lifestyle. Not turning every extra dollar into proof that you can relax all your rules. That is how people lose the progress they should have kept. They improve their income, but not their standards. They make more, but do not keep more. They feel safer, so they become less careful. They treat extra money as permission, not as opportunity. And then the improvement disappears. Not because the money was not real, because the system was not ready to keep it. This is why the question is not only, how can I earn more? That question matters. But another question matters just as much. Who am I becoming with the money I already have? Because more money will not erase your pattern. It will enlarge it. If you are clear, more money can enlarge clarity. If you are chaotic, more money can enlarge chaos. If you are patient, more money can enlarge patience. If you are impulsive, more money can enlarge impulse. If you are strategic, more money can enlarge strategy. If you are trying to prove something, more money can become a more expensive performance. That is why financial growth must be paired with personal maturity. Otherwise, the numbers may rise while the pressure rises too. The income grows, the obligations grow, the lifestyle grows, the image grows, but the peace does not. And what is the point of making more if you are only building a more expensive version of the same anxiety? This is where many people misunderstand freedom. They think freedom is having enough money to buy whatever they feel like buying. But that is not freedom. That can still be slavery, just with a larger budget. Freedom is not being ruled by every desire. Freedom is not needing every purchase to repair your mood. Freedom is not depending on appearance to feel valuable. Freedom is not being pushed around by urgency, shame, comparison, or fear. Freedom is the ability to choose with clarity, to say yes intentionally, to say no without panic, to wait without feeling humiliated, to enjoy without destroying your margin, to invest without desperation. to spend without lying to yourself, to build without needing applause. That kind of freedom is quieter than most people expect. It does not always look dramatic. Sometimes, it looks like a person sitting down, opening their account, and finally telling the truth. Sometimes it looks like saying, "I cannot afford this right now," without turning that sentence into shame. Sometimes it looks like choosing a simpler life for a season so the future can breathe. Sometimes it looks like not explaining yourself to people who would not pay the cost of your bad decisions. Sometimes it looks like letting others misunderstand your progress because your progress is not designed for their approval. That is difficult in a world where so much financial behavior is social. People spend to signal. People upgrade to belong. People borrow to avoid feeling behind. People hide their stress behind presentation. People call pressure ambition because ambition sounds better. And social pressure can be expensive. Very expensive, because it does not only ask you to buy things. It asks you to become a version of yourself that is easier for others to recognize as successful. And if you accept that deal without thinking, your financial life starts serving an audience that will not pay your debt, an audience that will not fund your emergency, an audience that will not give you back the years, an audience that will scroll past your life in seconds. That is why financial maturity often requires social courage. The courage to be unimpressive for a while. The courage to not match every lifestyle around you. The courage to let a purchase pass. The courage to keep an older thing. The courage to say no. The courage to build quietly. The courage to value margin more than applause. And that courage is easier when your goal is clear. Because without a clear goal, every desire competes equally. A trip competes with debt repayment. A purchase competes with emergency savings. A new subscription competes with investing. An impulse competes with your future. Everything wants the same money. And if you do not decide what matters first, the loudest thing wins. Not the most important, the loudest, the most emotionally charged, the most urgent looking, the most socially rewarded, the most convenient, the most beautifully advertised. That is why prioritization is not optional. It is protection. You need to know what your money is for, at least broadly. Some is for survival. Some is for peace. Some is for future options. Some is for growth. Some is for enjoyment. Some is for generosity. Some is for learning. But if none of it is assigned, all of it becomes vulnerable. Vulnerable to mood. Vulnerable to pressure. Vulnerable to frictionless spending. Vulnerable to emergencies. Vulnerable to the old version of you. And the old version of you will not disappear just because you understood a video. That version has habits, familiar roots, old explanations, old emotional shortcuts, so do not expect it to vanish. Build around it. Create rules that make old patterns harder. Create environments that make better decisions easier. Create reviews that make drift visible early. Create automatic actions that protect your future before your mood gets involved. That is not extreme. That is realistic. A realistic person knows that intention is not enough. A realistic person knows that humans are inconsistent. A realistic person knows that life gets messy. A realistic person does not build a financial plan that only works for an ideal day. They build one that can survive ordinary human weakness. That is real discipline, not pretending you have no impulses, knowing you do, and refusing to let them run the whole system. So here's the practical heart of this entire idea. Do not finish financial learning without a behavioral output. That is the rule. If you listen to something about money, extract one action. 1, not 10. 10 actions become fantasy. 1 action becomes a bridge between information and life. If you learned about spending, track 1 category. If you learned about debt, calculate the real cost. If you learned about saving, automate a small transfer. If you learned about investing, write down what you do not understand before you put money into it. If you learned about risk, define what amount would actually hurt you to lose. If you learned about emergency funds, choose the first target. If you learned about impulse buying, create 1 delay rule. If you learned about lifestyle inflation, decide what percentage of your next raise or extra income will not become spending. Make the lesson leave a footprint. That is the difference. A footprint. Something in the world that proves the idea moved. Because without a footprint, learning can vanish. You feel it today. Forget it tomorrow. Repeat the old pattern next week. Then search for another video to feel awake again. That cycle is exhausting, and it can last years. Years of almost changing. Years of understanding but not applying. Years of feeling close but staying in the same place. Years of saying, I know, while your behavior quietly says, no, you do not. Because if you knew in the deepest sense, your actions would start changing. Not perfectly, but visibly. And maybe that is the best way to define real knowledge. Real knowledge leaves evidence. If there is no evidence, maybe the idea is still only information. That is not a reason to shame yourself. It is a reason to convert it. Convert one idea, today, not someday, today, and keep it small enough that your excuses look ridiculous. Because if your first step is too big, your fear can negotiate. If your first step is small and concrete, the excuse loses power. Review 7 days of spending. Separate a small amount. Cancel one unused payment. Wait before one purchase. List your debts. Write one rule. That is not everything, but it is not nothing. And not nothing is where change begins. Because nothing is the real enemy. Not slow progress. Not small progress. Not imperfect progress. Nothing. Nothing hidden behind learning. Nothing hidden behind planning. Nothing hidden behind waiting. Nothing hidden behind I need to understand more. Nothing hidden behind next month. Nothing hidden behind when I earn more. Nothing hidden behind when life calms down. Life may not calm down. You may have to build inside noise. You may have to start while tired. You may have to learn while imperfect. You may have to save while it feels small. You may have to invest later than you wanted, but earlier than your fear prefers. You may have to face numbers that embarrass you. You may have to admit that your old approach has not worked. Good. That admission is not the end. It is the beginning of an honest plan. And an honest plan beats a beautiful fantasy. Every time, because fantasy gives relief. A plan gives direction. Fantasy makes you feel like the future will somehow be different. A plan forces the future to begin appearing in today's behavior. That is why you should be careful with any financial content that only gives you excitement. Excitement fades. Direction remains. A good piece of financial content should make you think. Yes, but it should also make you act. It should leave you slightly less willing to lie to yourself. It should make avoidance harder. It should make your next bad excuse sound weaker. It should give you a sharper question to carry into your next decision. And maybe this is the question. Am I learning about money to change, or am I learning about money to feel better while staying the same? Do not answer that too quickly. Let it hit the places where it needs to hit. Look at your actual life, not your intentions, not your saved videos, not your notes, not the version of you that exists in your imagination. Look at the last month. Look at what repeated. Look at what you avoided. Look at what you justified. Look at what you protected. Look at what you allowed. That is where the real answer is. And if the answer is uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is not failure. Discomfort may be the first honest signal you have had in a long time. Use it. Do not turn it into shame. Turn it into one action. Because one action is how you stop being a passive consumer of financial advice. One action is how you begin taking your own life seriously. One action is how you tell yourself, I am not just listening anymore. And if you keep doing that, something changes. Slowly at first, then noticeably. Your numbers become less mysterious. Your spending becomes less automatic. Your debt becomes less vague. Your saving becomes less dramatic. Your investing becomes less emotional. Your decisions become less reactive. Your confidence becomes less dependent on motivation. And one day, maybe not dramatically, maybe not in a way anyone else notices, you realize that money no longer scares you in the same way. Not because you have infinite money. Not because nothing can go wrong. Not because you solved everything. But because you stopped hiding. You started building. And that is a different life. A life where learning has weight. A life where clarity becomes behavior. A life where discipline does not have to be loud. A life where freedom is not a fantasy you watch other people sell. It is something you practice in small decisions before it becomes visible. So do not end this by saying, that was interesting. That sentence is too weak. End it by choosing the evidence. What will prove that this did not just pass through your ears? What will be different? One number? One rule? One transfer? One cancellation? One review? One delayed purchase? One honest conversation? Choose one. And do it before the feeling fades. Because the feeling will fade. The mood will change. The day will continue. The old pattern will return and ask for its place back. And when it does, you need more than inspiration. You need proof. Proof that you are no longer only a person who understands money better. You are becoming a person who behaves differently with it. That is the real line. Not knowledge. Behavior, not intention. Evidence, not financial content. Financial conversion. And if you understand that, this message is not just another video. It is a mirror, maybe even a doorway, but only if you walk through it. Because nobody can apply this for you. Nobody can review your numbers for you in the way you need to face them. Nobody can make your private decisions honest. Nobody can build your rules while you keep negotiating against them. Nobody can rescue your money from your habits if you keep defending the habits. At some point, the responsibility returns to you. Not all of it. Not the entire economy. Not every circumstance. Not every injustice. Not every limitation. But the part that is yours. The part you can see. The part you can adjust. The part you can stop avoiding. The part where the next decision lives. Start there. Not because it is everything. Because it is yours. And once you start taking care of what is yours, your life begins to feel less random. Less like money just disappears. Less like every month attacks you. Less like the future is only something that happens to you. You become a participant, not a spectator. And that is one of the first forms of financial freedom. Before wealth, before big investments, before impressive numbers, before any fantasy. There is this. The moment you stop using learning as a hiding place and start using it as a tool, that moment matters. Because from there, every lesson has a job. Every idea must earn its place. Every insight must become clearer behavior. And every day becomes an opportunity to vote for the person you claim you want to become. So ask yourself one last time, without decoration, what does your money prove about what you actually believe? Not what you say, not what you post, not what you understand. What you repeat. If the answer hurts, listen to it. Pain is not always an enemy. Sometimes pain is just truth arriving late. And if truth has arrived, do not waste it. Turn it into a rule. Turn it into a decision. Turn it into a system. Turn it into evidence. Because financial change does not begin when you know enough to sound smart. It begins when you respect the truth enough to move. And if you reached this point, maybe you are not here for easy promises. Maybe you are here because part of you is tired of hearing the same advice and living the same month. Maybe part of you already knows that the next step is not more noise. It is more honesty, more structure, more action, less performance, less hiding, less waiting. And if that kind of content speaks to you, then you are probably in the right place. Because this is not about selling you a fantasy. It is about learning to see patterns, naming the uncomfortable part, and building enough discipline to stop being ruled by the same excuses. So keep the question close. Are you learning about money to change? Or are you learning about money to feel responsible while staying the same? The answer will not be found in this script. It will be found in what you do next. And that is exactly where it should be.